Good morning, hello, welcome. This is a Runic journey update sort of video. I've been, I guess, contemplating my Runic journey, having the blank rune, which I can acknowledge as a controversial rune to have in a set, is or has allowed me this chance to reflect on my journey so far and where I'm going and what I'm doing. I got a new rune book arrive at the weekend, just to add to the other two I've got, just to, I don't know, look at different opinions on the runes and what I am doing. And unlike the two books I've already got, this book is one that doesn't include the blank rune, which I think is good. It's certainly got some information in there that encourages different ways to look at the runes. The big thing is, over the weekend I've been allowed a little bit of a break to step back and to think about things and to really focus myself on things that I've already read, that I wanted to remind myself of and look at the translations regarding runes as they are talked about in the Havamal. And there's a lot of important things in there that really, I suppose, should be the critical information. And I'm going to read through some of the passages. I mean, I've read them a few times. You've got alternate translations on my Wandering the Path of Asatru playlist. But I'm going to go through some of the verses here and then just go through some thoughts I have sort of swirling around in my head at the moment. So we'll start with Havamal verse 142, and this is the Carolyn Larrington translation. The runes you must find, and meaningful letters, very great letters, very stiff letters, which the mighty sage coloured and the huge powers made, and the rune master of the gods carved out. Odin among the Aesir, and Dane amongst the elves, Valin among the dwarfs, Asfid among the giants. I myself carved some. Do you know how to carve? Do you know how to interpret? Do you know how to colour? Do you know how to question? Do you know how to ask? Do you know how to sacrifice? Do you know how to dispatch? Do you know how to slaughter? Better not to pray than to sacrifice too much. One gift always calls for another. Better not dispatched than too many slaughtered. So Fund carved before the close of nations' history, where he rose up when he came back. And there's obviously someone like Jackson Crawford has got, particularly verse 144, slightly different meaning. And I'm going to just go through and retell verse 144, mainly because I think in a lot of ways this is the main verse that dictates or suggests how we should be interacting and using runes. So this is the Jackson Crawford translation of verse 144. Do you know how to write them? Do you know how to read them? Do you know how to paint them? Do you know how to test them? Do you know how to ask them? Do you know how to bless them? Do you know how to send them? Do you know how to offer them? Now, obviously, over the last 100 years or so, there are multiple translations of the Havamal and variations between Crawford, Larrington and Bellows, Thorpe and whatnot and so forth. But I think looking at them, there's a lot of guidance there that the books I've read so far, or I'm looking at, I guess really with the blank rune, it's very much a modern injection into runes. There's acknowledged to be the 24 runes, the blank rune makes it 25, and honestly, I can see a place for it in that it's a blank space, it's a open point, if you like. I mean, I think you can really make or have an interesting debate about you don't need the blank rune because you're kind of stating the obvious. It is an opening of ways that when we are engaging with runes to really sort of tap into them, you're opening yourself, you're creating a link. And I feel to some extent that this is what the blank rune offers to people. However, so of the books I've got, they're outside, they're not Norse pagan specific books. The recent one I've purchased is by Lisa Chamberlain, and it's very much from a Wicca perspective. Obviously, it's got sections that talk about Odin and what he does, and it's the same for the Ralph Bloom book and the Soraya book. I mean, they're modern interpretations, and I'm not going to out and out say that they should be dismissed, because like with Crawford, with the Poetic Edda, you want outside perspectives looking in to give you sort of as much neutral information as possible. But I'm on the inside, as it were. I am Norse pagan, and I am also trying to find my way by having these as guidance. But yeah, this is my path, and I'm trying to go into it on my terms, and sort of understand and discover what these runes represent and know them as readily as I can know myself, and by binding to each of the runes as I'm doing and creating relationships with them and understanding and trying to understand what I experience and finding a way to fit that into what we have written down in such as the Havamal. And looking back, it's the runes await us. They exist in on a level that it's for us to sort of reach out and make contact with them. And when I think back to a few weeks ago when I had the dream I had of them floating in like a watery sort of space, and seeing them as green, I've kind of, or what I want to understand or believe at this moment in time is that they await contact from individuals and exist in a state of natural energy, which is why I think that I saw them as the green colour they were in their shapes existing, and really it's as we apply ourselves to making contact with them, we are then sort of, as we make that contact, it's down to us to sort of draw them in and then sort of work with them in the way that we choose to do. So that's very much finding them. Obviously, going back to verse 44, it's, do you know how to carve? Well, on one layer, that's sort of, suggestions are that often the runes have been carved into stone or into wood, to carve them. But yet, even few faux pas in this video now. I keep saying but, and I do dislike saying it for the stupidest reason. Well, that's another tale for another time. But I also think and feel, do you know how to carve? Do you know how to carve the runes? And that is to reach out and carve, perhaps, them from their space and draw them into you. Do you know how to interpret them? Well, this is perhaps the hardest part of understanding and making use of the runes, because you want to be drawing them in, and then you are the lens through which you interpret them, how they come into you and how they go out from you, what you choose to do with them. That is the art of the interpretation. It's not really enough to casually just throw some runes on the floor. I mean, if that's your practice, and that is a form of practice, I think at the heart of it, there are, like with many of the things in the Poetic Edda and with any religion really, but in particular with Asatru, Norse paganism, there are multiple layers to a thing, a subject. And runes are no different. There are multiple layers to the runes. And obviously there are multiple ways for them to be interpreted. Do you know how to colour? This, I believe, is where you interpret and you colour them to put them to the use you want to make of them. As I've said, it's just my current understanding and feeling, my intuition on this is when you draw the runes to yourself, they exist in a state of green colouring. They're natural. But how you colour them is going to influence to what purpose you are using them. And I was talking yesterday to my wife about this, that I have a strong drive that runes at this, and this is again at this stage, I've got a long way to go yet, but I feel at this stage that runes being employed to a purpose should be read. I can't really explain that other than looking into colours a little bit more, sort of some research yesterday. Red seems to be a very positive colour to use. It shows positivity. Obviously red is also indicated to be something that gives a warning or shows danger. I feel at this stage it's very much about positivity, but yet there are colours, and depending on how you're choosing to use the runes, I feel very much that the colour you choose comes from how you understand them and how you are deploying them, putting them to purpose. Do you know how to question? Do you know how to ask? They can seem quite similar, but yet... Okay, quick timeout. The whole reason I have an issue with saying but is this, you can consider this a really dumb reason, but yet if you have watched Game of Thrones, one of the things, one of Ned Stark's favourite sayings, and he says this in the first episode, says this in the book as well, is that anything that is said before the word but is horseshit. I like that saying, and yet you can't help but say it. So yeah, it's everything I've said up to this point could be horseshit. That's your decision to make. I mean, I am coming to terms of my understanding with the runes. Your path may be different. You may say that I am doing everything wrong. But this is part of the questioning process. I am questioning myself. I am questioning the runes. I am questioning my path, because I am trying to understand as openly, earnestly, honestly as I can. And there's always going to be a certain amount of mystery, misunderstanding, or hidden lore, because at the end of the day, I am just a mortal man. I am not Odin. I am no rune master. I am trying to make my best judgment with the abilities I have. So do you know how to ask? Well, I think this in particular is about using the runes for divination. What are you asking? obviously the following verse, 145, gives you some guidance. It's better not to pray than to sacrifice too much. One gift always calls for another. Better not dispatched than too many slaughtered. Be careful what you ask for. Be conscious of what you are asking of the runes. One of the lessons we see throughout the Poetic Edda, it is great to have destiny. However, with destiny comes prophecy, and what can come of having a great destiny is also having a great doom. And knowing what can be before you can frustrate you or trip you up. I felt for a long time a lot of Odin's journey is knowing what his fate is at Ragnarok and not accepting that fate and doing everything that Odin can to confound that fate. It is in a level of me why I believe that there's little reference to Frigg. And in Lokasenna, it is said that Frigg understands destiny far greater than anyone else, and she does not talk about it. And that is important. It is either a blessing or a curse to see people's fates. And what should you do with that knowledge? How does it colour a person's acts and actions if they know what their fate is to be? That's a great responsibility and should not be undertaken lightly. Do you know how to sacrifice? Obviously, when you are empowering runes and making connections to them and putting them to use, you have to give something. They have their own power, but if you are drawing them in and putting them to use, you have to put the right colour to them. You have to put them to the right use. You have to offer something. This can be in the process of how you employ the rune, how you make it manifest. At the end of the day, as you are working with runes, what you sacrifice to empower it is your choice. But you have to give something. Each time you work with the runes, it's not enough for it just to be the rune's power, because if you're taking it from somewhere and transforming it and taking it somewhere else, putting it somewhere else, it's in contact with you. You are giving something to send it on its way to its purpose. That is a part of the give and take relationship that exists really between all things. You can't just take. and let the rune go on its way without a part of you attached to it. And even when it's dispatched, you are responsible for it. Responsibility. Next line, do you know how to dispatch? I think you can look at this in a couple of ways. Now, obviously, the first thing is how you deliver it, to what purpose you're setting it to. For example, if you are employing runes of protection, how are you dispatching them? How are you making them markers? That's a dispatch point. Obviously, you're creating, painting, carving, empowering, setting a focus for the rune. How are you dispatching it? I think also, this isn't something I've looked into yet, but in the making of this video and been thinking about it, how do you dispatch runes? This could also be if you come across runes that are perhaps in your way, obstructing you, you have to be able to deal with them. You have to be able to deal with someone else's rune casting. Do you know how to dispatch them? It's not something I've tried or given too much thought about. However, it is something to contemplate. If someone's runes are obstructing your journey, how do you dispatch them? To some extent, a rune placed somewhere or cast against you will have some physical form, probably. And it might be as simple as finding that physical representation and spoiling it. It's not something I feel should be done casually. There's power there. Power that's set to be an obstruction. Because at the end of the day, no one's going to dispatch a helpful rune, something that is friendly. But if something is there to obstruct you, how you deal with it is also a level of understanding that you have to tap into that obstruction and purge it of its purpose. And that would require cautious work. And I think this leads into the final bit. Do you know how to slaughter? Now, obviously, we could go for the obvious, stereotypical, well, this is Norse paganism, and they're obviously all Vikings who like to go raiding and killing. Blah, do you know how to slaughter? But this is talking about runes. And obviously, in the following verse, 145, it says, better not dispatched than too many slaughtered. Harmful runes. Yeah, I mean, I've just been talking about runes put on people to obstruct them. And I think, really, this last section is about using them in an aggressive way, and without wanting to sound too cliche or making a stereotype, perhaps with modern paganism, people using the runes or looking into self-developed powers. There's always a lot of peace, fluffiness, and bunnies, sort of love is the way. And don't get me wrong, do not get me wrong, the world is a better place when we are being kind, compassionate. There is a side of aggression. Sometimes aggression is required to deal with aggressive forces. Only you can decide if a situation requires aggressive deployment. Ultimately, peace and harmony are good. Everyone living their lives in peace is good. But there are negative forces. There are negative energies, negative people, aggressive people that simply enjoy ruining people for the sake of it. And ultimately, sometimes you have to act, and the runes can do that. Again, going back to what I was saying about colours of runes, perhaps while it is a positive energy, being red, it is also associated with war and blood, and if you're going to employ harmful or confounding runes upon a target, red would probably be an employment of colour to the runes. There's a lot to understand, a lot to consider, a lot that could be a mistake, or I might be wrong about. We've lost a lot of knowledge, and we've got limited resources that give us windows to our past. The hardest thing I see really is people stuck with restricted by only the past versus sort of recent avenues of pursuit that give the faith a bad name, as well as the modern take on things and a certain amount of disrespect for not being able to suggest or be heard as a way to influence and change things moving forward, because life is constant. We respect, venerate the past, let it guide us, but it's okay for things to evolve, adapt, or even change or be created. I think this brings me back to the blank rune in some respects. Obviously, there's no historic evidence for a blank rune. Some people dislike the idea of runes being a writing system, and yet it's used to write. Translations of stones with runes over them work as translations with names and statements. We're caught between tradition and trend, because there's something very trendy about the runes, or even Norse paganism, you could argue. We're at our best, I feel, when we're in balance. We live in the here and now. We are the sum of our ancestors. We're also the projection and protection of what is to come. What is before us, the children we are having or have, are the future. We have to come to terms with all aspects equally. It's good if we bring in new things, and I guess really popular movement will influence that, whether it's seen as lame as, I don't know, having a Vikings TV show haircut or something else. This is a longer video than I expected it to be, to some extent, but there's a lot going on in my head. And I think to some extent the blank rune has allowed this to happen, and I feel it has a space because it's not a space, and therefore you don't actually need a blank rune, because I can see it being used to make a shape, which I will do a video about once I've drawn my final rune. So it's a long way off, and obviously that allows me the chance to experience more, understand more, and possibly even change my opinion as it stands today making this video. I don't want to be confined to this opinion I have today, sort of in 4 or 5 months' time when I'm drawing my final rune, and then I have to draw sort of conclusions and acknowledge my understanding as it is at that point, which is in our future, because things might change, and that has to be a good thing. And also, by making this video and comments, I can remain guided by it. It is a learning process, a process of possibly some things that have been lost. Anyway, if you've watched this video to the end, thank you. You may agree, you may disagree. Whatever you think of this video or the runes, I am not challenging you. I am wishing you well and hope that at some point we all reach a greater understanding of these mysteries that exist in our lives. So thank you very much, and I will see you soon. I expect my next video will either be a short one tomorrow as a conclusion for the blank rune. I think this kind of does that to some extent, to be honest, but maybe a video tomorrow. There'll be a video on Wednesday when I draw a new rune, and I hope to see you there. Thank you very much. Goodbye.